prayer to open the windows of heaven in your heart. There's a story from the teaching of Jesus that sets up today's message very nicely. It's about being and defining what is a neighbor. Just then, it's Luke 10:25-37. Just then, a religious scholar stood up with a question to test Jesus. "Teacher, what do I need to do to get eternal life?" Jesus answered, "What's written in God's law? How do you interpret it?" The teacher said, "That you love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and muscle and intelligence, and that you love your neighbor as well as you do yourself." "Good answer," said Jesus. "Do it and you'll live." Looking for a loophole, the teacher asked, "And just how would you define neighbor?" Jesus answered by telling a story. There was once a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. On the way, he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, beat him up, and went off, leaving him for dead. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road, but when he saw him, he angled across to the other side. Then a Levite religious man showed up, but he also avoided the injured man. A Samaritan traveling the road came on him. When he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. He gave him first aid, disinfecting and bandaging his wounds. Then he lifted him onto his own donkey, led him to an inn, and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take good care of this man. If it costs any more, you put it on my bill. I'll pay you on my way back." Jesus said, "What do you think? Which of these 3 became a neighbor to the man attacked by the robbers?" The teacher said, "The one who treated him kindly," he responded. Jesus said, "Go and do the same."
Good morning. Each week we talk about, in some form or fashion, realizing our oneness with God and with each other. It's very nice to make that a vision statement. It's very easy to visualize unconditional love. And what I'm inviting us to do today is to take that in and to make it a plan of action. And for me, it's a lot easier to visualize visualize unconditional love than to realize I'm committing myself that every person who crossed my path, I will love them unconditionally. And what comes up for me is fear. What if that person that I have chosen, who has stumbled across my path, has some sort of darkness or evil in them or could cause me harm, and I become afraid? So that's why I'm talking about the courage to love unconditionally. There have been times when I have actually been spiritually fit enough to feel what unconditional love is like. And it is very different from regular love. I don't love you and then, feel amorous about you. Unconditional love is when I am so spiritually fit that I feel the power of love coming up through me. And I love you because I have no choice. It just flows like a cup that runneth over. And that's what I'm inviting us to do, to take the time and the space to see each other as we are and to feel that, as we call each day, the divinity that we see in each one of us. I'm going to talk today about 3 different people. I'm going to talk mostly about Martin Luther King, who we will honor tomorrow. He was one of my personal heroes. I'm going to mostly focus on his last sermon from the mountaintop. I'm also going to talk briefly about a workshop that we're going to have, which is in response to President Obama and the plight of youth. I remember when I was on the mainland, they talked about a youth summit, and they went to a Chicano, a Latino student, and he says, "I don't even know why I bother with career planning. Based on the statistics, I'll end up in jail." And finally, we're going to end on a high note. It's not going to all be a downer. I'm going to talk about Nelson Mandela and how he, through the power of forgiveness, was able to transform himself and his nation and unite the nation of South Africa. Now, when I was growing up, I was just about 18 when Martin Luther King gave this last sermon. And I was at that age, as many teens are, where I'm looking at different adults as role models. And Martin Luther King was one of my heroes. And one common element in all of the people that I admired was that they were great speakers. And there was a line out of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech that I found riveting.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
And I found that to be such an impactful statement. I always thought that discrimination based on skin color was kind of silly. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't know it was real. It was very real. But what a surfacey thing to do, to decide whether or not you like somebody based on something they can't control and says very little about them. Didn't content of character make a much better way to evaluate people and to value people? And that became like a pole star for me. Think of what a different nation we would have today if we used that as our criterion. If we chose our bankers and our CEOs based not only on profitability, but on community service and content of character. What if we chose all of our elected officials based on what they would do for the common man? If we chose them based on content of character? What if, in addition to reading and writing, we taught content of character and provided a space so the kids didn't feel bullied on their campuses? We would be a very different nation indeed. Not only was he a great speaker, what I loved about him is not only could he talk, he walked his talk. He rode buses, he was in marches, he went to jail, he faced dogs and fire hoses. Whatever he needed to do to push his cause forward, he was willing to do. I, on the other hand, as the typical college student, I solved the problems of the world every day, every weekend in my dorm room or over a cafeteria table. And what I even had this poster that looked like this in my room, and it said, after all is said and done, there's a lot more said than done. That was the way I was living my life. That was the way many of us college students were living in our lives. And this is actually a paraphrase from Aesop. So it's been around for a long time. The other thing that I loved about him and admired about him is that he was absolutely fearless. He was unafraid to talk truth to power. He was unafraid to reach out to others in other different races. He didn't care where you were in the spectrum. He was going to reach out to you. He was unafraid to live. He was unafraid to love. He was unafraid to die. And in his last sermon, he actually predicted his own death.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but that really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that as a people, we will get to the promised land. And so I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
The next day, Martin Luther King was assassinated. 2 months later, another hero of mine, Robert Kennedy, was shot in Los Angeles, not far from my home. Killed by a guy who happened to go to my same high school. It brought that lesson very close to home. 2 years later, National Guard fired open on students, killing 4. And I came away from it. I could have chosen to admire their courage and their willing for sacrifice. Because what I saw is courage had its price. If you stood up and you stood out for something, you could be killed. So rather than stepping up and having increased courage, I hid. And I hid for about 2 decades. And I don't know if you can read it in the back, but the t-shirt says, "Nobody knows I'm a lesbian." And I hid for 2 decades. I went to work every day. I worked as hard as I could. I felt I had to excel because I didn't want to lose my job. And I was afraid if people found out that I was a lesbian, I would lose my job. This is during the time of the Healdberg Amendment, where they were going to try and eliminate all gays and lesbians from teaching. When I got one of my first jobs, they asked on the job application, "Do you have homosexual tendencies?" It was something for which you could easily have been fired. So I hid. And the more I hid, the more afraid I became. And the more afraid I became, the more paranoid I became. And I washed it all down with plenty of liquor, which made, of course, the fear and the paranoia even worse. Eventually, I hit bottom, and I started to crawl out, one step at a time, one amends at a time, one reaching out at a time. And I found as I was digging my way out of that process that each time I showed a little faith and a little courage, I became stronger. Each time I reached out to someone else, I could love more. Each time I was willing to speak truth to power, I felt more powerful. So I personally have paid the price for not having courage, and I have paid the price for having courage. Because either side of the coin, courage has its price. And I would prefer to pay the price of having courage than to pay the price for not having it. The price is greater, but so are the rewards. We are going to hold a workshop. We are going to hold a workshop about this whole idea of I see you. Obviously, it's going to take a whole lot more than I can begin to cover in 15 minutes. We will be holding it on February 15th. It'll be love offering only. I'm bringing in 2 terrific speakers. Timothy Riera, who is the head of the EEOC here in Hawaii, to talk about a discrimination case here in Hawaii. Because one of the things that I found here is we tend to think that Martin Luther King's message is for some time very different and from some place very distant. And if one thing that I know, especially after what I experienced in the special session last month, is discrimination is very much alive here in Hawaii. It is here today in Hawaii, nay. The other person I'm bringing in is Anel Amaral. The ministry team have heard her speak. You can ask any of them. I personally worship the water she walks on. She is a riveting speaker. She is on the paroling authority, and she will talk about the disproportionate representation of Hawaiians in the prison population and what we can do to help. So after we go through and we talk about these social issues and what we can do, then we're going to do another round, a little more personal, having created a safe space. What discrimination and slights have we experienced? Then get another round and talk about our vision for the church, because I think this is the perfect time for us as a church to really begin to see each other and to bond. I see a lot of your faces. I know a few of your names, and I even know fewer of your stories. But the ones that I have gotten to know, the stories are fascinating. I'm inviting you on a tremendous adventure to get to know each other as a congregation. So now let's hear from Martin Luther King on the road to Jericho, which was his final sermon.
I'm going to tell you what my imagination tells me. It's possible that those men were afraid. You see, the road to Jericho is a dangerous road. It's a winding and meandering road. It's really conducive to ambushing. In the days of Jesus, it became known as the Bloody Pass. And you know, it's possible that those men looked at the man on the ground over there, and they wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible that they felt that the man on the ground was merely faking. They felt as if he was acting as if he had been robbed and hurt to lure them there for easy seizure. And the question that the priest asked, the first question that the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? And then the Good Samaritan came by, and he reversed the question. If I don't stop to help this man, what will happen to him?
Thank you. And let's thank Ralph Whitaker for... I just knew we had to have Martin live. Like Margie, as Margie read, I learned the Good Samaritan as the obligation to help another. That was the way I was brought up on the Bible. When I started to research this, I found out that Levites and Samaritans, Jews and Samaritan, hated each other. Hated each other. So what Jesus was saying in this message was not just the duty to help each other, but let's not presume that the one that goes to our country club or graduated from our high school are all good, and those that went to the rival school or belong to a different ethnic group are all bad. Let's judge them by their works and by their deeds. Yeah. Now, what Martin Luther King put yet another spin. What if we are afraid to help each other, and that's why we won't cross the road? And that, to me, piggybacks right on what President Obama has asked us to do. Because President Obama asked us to begin a national discussion about black youth, which we will expand to be relevant here. But he asked it because of the killing of Trayvon Martin, a kid who was 17 years old who went to get candy. Now, the facts were in dispute, but the bottom line was Trayvon was shot. Shortly after that, within a year after that, 2 other people who got into a car accident went up to seek help in their respective neighborhoods, one in Florida, one I think it was in Ohio. Anyway, different parts of the country, went to seek help in the middle of the night, and they were shot. So if Martin Luther King's theory is right, that we are afraid to help another, I would say we have gone to not only will we cross the road, but once we get here, we'll shoot the person that's injured. That's why we have to have this discussion right here, right now. We have an obligation to learn to ask each other the important questions. Now, I'm not saying that seeing each other is easy. And I'm going to use this optical illusion just to show you that even at a fundamental level, perceiving and seeing each other isn't easy. There are 2 sets of images in this optical illusion. On the outside, you will see 2 profiles. Everybody see that? 2 profiles. In the middle is a vase or a candlestick. I've seen it described both ways. Now, can everybody see both figures? Now, while I talk, I want you to watch what happens. Focus and watch what your mind does. Your mind will rapidly flip between the 2, trying hard to figure out which is the foreground and which is the background. And what we tend to do as people is declare that one or the other of them is the correct image. And what we have to do if we really want to see each other is come to accept that there can be two other images. We can see each other if we accept that we may see the same thing differently. You can see the vase, you can see the profiles, and you're both right. And then you have to add on top of that everything else that comes in that complicates things. But if you go in realizing that even fundamental perception is tricky, I invite that it will encourage you to listen better and to watch more carefully. This is a hoodie, a hooded sweatshirt. For people like Brian or Margie or I, who have lived in the Northwest. Anybody else lived in the Northwest? We all know what a hoodie is for. It's an absolute, you got to have one because it rains all the time. And you wear a hoodie because you don't want to carry an umbrella. So you wear a hooded sweatshirt. If it rains, you put up your hoodie. When it doesn't, you're done. That way you keep all your hands free. So a hoodie in the Northwest is only a symbol of you probably live here. But when Trayvon Martin wore a hoodie in Florida neighborhood, George Zimmerman saw a threat to his neighborhood. The hoodie that I showed earlier actually does not belong to Trayvon Martin. It belongs to the other guy featured here, Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski was the Unabomber. And whereas Trayvon Martin only lived to his 17th year, Ted Kaczynski, in his hoodie, went in and out of Sacramento and mailed 16 bombs, injuring 23 people and killing 3, completely unseen. So we can't make presumptions when we see a hoodie as to what is the intent of the person. I would suggest that we need to ask questions rather than presume answers. Would the result have been different if George Zimmerman said to Trayvon, I don't recognize you. Are you from this neighborhood? And he could have been given an opportunity to say, I'm visiting my father's fiance. If someone had taken the time to engage Ted Kaczynski, they might have realized early on how pathologically angry he was at technology. But we have to ask questions and we have to listen to the answers. As Marianne Williamson said, until we have seen someone's darkness, we don't really know who they are. And isn't that what a lot of us do? Isn't that why we're afraid to get to know people and let people get to know us? You will find that thing that I try to keep hidden away. But until we see that darkness and forgive someone's darkness, we don't really know what love is. So I think I've heavied up enough on you here. We're now going to go and get real light in conclusion. We're going to talk to the angels that we talked to when I gave the Mother's Day sermon and we found out why women got to give birth. Now we're going to find out why the angels gave us different skin colors.
You know, I was thinking they'd look fabulous in a yellow.
Oh, so they'll all wear yellow.
No, not for their outfits, their skin.
Their skin?
Yeah, yellow skin.
I think it'd be fun to have lots of colors.
Oh, that's a better idea.
Yeah.
You know, I really love that tan caramelish color.
Yeah, and red.
Red's good.
Ooh, and I love those olive tones.
Olive and black and a rich dark brown.
And white.
White? Isn't that a little bland?
I thought it'd be kind of nice, you know. White has that.
Well, no, I would just be afraid that the white people would feel a little inferior. I mean, you know, red, tan, yellow, white. Sort of.
Well, who knows how they'll react.
That's true.
Better make a note to keep an eye on them.
All right. Watch the whites.
Okay.
Watch the whites. That's what Nelson Mandela did after they imprisoned him for 27 years. He could have become incredibly embittered. But what he decided to do instead was to watch the whites. And in doing so, he found out about his oppressors. He read their literature, their poetry. He found out what meant something to them. And he was able, once he was able to see them, to forgive them. And he was able then, as part of that journey, one of the things that he discovered is the Afrikaners loved their rugby. They loved their Springbok rugby. So when he was released from prison and was elected as president, the National Sports Council was going to insist that all the sports teams wear the logo where it says SA Cricket. And he came in and said, no, I want to keep the Springbok symbol as it is. They love their rugby. We risk making enemies out of what could be allies. So he let them keep their symbol. He then went, because apartheid had ended, they were holding the National Rugby Cup in South Africa. He went to the stadium, donning the jersey of their captain, the number 6 green and gold logo, and he went into the locker room and spoke to the team and wished them well. And the captain said, after I heard him, I would have run through walls for that guy. I would have played until I couldn't play anymore. And then Nelson went out before a crowd of 62,000 people, 55,000 of whom were white. You can imagine what his security detail thought of that move. Here is how they responded.
Instinctively, the almost exclusively white crowd responded to Mandela's public statement of forgiveness by chanting his name. His risk was already paying political dividends.
He said, I understand fully and totally how important rugby is to the Afrikaner, how important is the Springbok emblem to the Afrikaner. And because of their support for me as the first ever black president, that's why I went out to support the Springbok.
Because he saw them and he saw what they valued, he was able to preserve what they valued. And they, in turn, could see Nelson Mandela in a different light. They had put him away to prison for life because he had been engaging in terrorist activities. What they could see now before them was a man who was their president, a man who was their leader, and a man who did not seek revenge, but sought to unite a nation. The power of forgiveness is absolutely transformative. And in one act, he transformed a nation. I invite you now, in these times of transition, to use this as an opportunity to get to know each other and to bond with each other so that we come through this transition process even stronger as a congregation. And if we can get unconditional love going here, then maybe we can take it to the rest of the Pacific Rim. Maybe we can take it to the world. Maybe let's do a Sky St. John. Let's think big. Let's say, with the courage to love unconditionally, we can unite and heal a wounded world. Thank you.